Good morning and welcome to the Lowitja Institute Major Research Grant Q&A webinar. I'm Felicity Collis and I'm a proud Gomeroi woman from northwest New South Wales along the Namoi River Run, and I'm a Senior Project Officer here at the Lowitja Institute. And it's absolutely my honour and privilege to be joining you all today. In this webinar, you will meet with some of our research and knowledge translation team who will provide you with an overview of our major grant scheme, details on how to apply, and answer any questions you might have. I would like to acknowledge country and pay respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. We are connecting with you from the unceded lands of the Worimi and Awabakal people who are the caretakers of these lands, seas, skies and waterways since time immemorial. I extend that acknowledgement and respect to the lands on which you are all dialing in from today. This always was and always will be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land. For today's session, audience members are muted and the chat is disabled. If I can direct your attention to the bottom of the screen, you're encouraged to use the Q&A function for questions. Just simply click on the Q&A icon and type in your questions there. We'll be able to answer these during the Q&A part of our webinar, but you're welcome to drop your questions in at any time throughout the webinar. I'll return to support the Q&A portion of this event, but for now, I'll hand you over to the team who will introduce and position themselves.
Thanks, Flick. Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Kennedy. I'm a Wiradjuri woman. My family have connections along the Cudgegong River and Tugundagai, but my mob are station workers and sheep shearers. So we have lived and worked all across Wiradjuri lands, but I've grown up off my country here on Worimi Country. I'm a mother, a stepmother, a sister and an auntie, an artist, social worker, and now Aboriginal health researcher. And it's my privilege to be able to work with mob every day, drawing on our expert knowledges as blackfellas to drive change for the health and well-being of our people. Everything we do in our research is informed by our standpoint or our social and cultural positioning. Who we are, but most importantly, who claims us, informs the research that I conduct. I'm the research advisor for Lowitja Institute and was previously the executive manager of the research and knowledge translation team, where I redesigned our grants program, the application forms and the processes. So I'm fairly confident that I can answer any questions that you guys might throw at me today. And when I'm not at Lowitja Institute, I run a research program here at the University of Newcastle, where I share an office with the very deadly Shaylee.
Thank you, Shell. My name is Shaylee Fairman. I'm a proud Wiradjuri woman, granddaughter, daughter, auntie and sister. I was raised on Ngunnawal, Ngambri country while my family is from Griffith, Wagga and the broader New South Wales Riverina. I've worked at the Lowitja Institute since early 2022 as part of the Research and Knowledge Translation team, delivering a wide range of community and early career researcher grants. Additionally, I'm in my first year of my undergraduate studies in social science and criminology at the University of Newcastle. My learnings on how to work with mob have been taught to me by my elders, but most specifically my grandmother, Isabel Collins, who taught me it was our job to look after our mob proper ways, hence why I am here today. These last 2 years have led me to meeting some amazing opportunities, including meeting with communities and working with them to transform their ideas into deadly research projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Shay. Shay will be back a bit later to go over the Smarty Grants application portal. So we have a really brief kind of agenda for today. We want to give you a bit of an overview of our major research grants, run through the new Lowitja Institute research agenda themes. We'll discuss the eligibility and selection criteria, some key dates, and then we're handing over to you where you can ask any questions. Please, as Felicity said previously, please drop the questions in as we're talking. It's really the most useful. This time is the most useful if you guys engage a lot. Ask us any questions that you have. Don't be shame, be game, because sometimes You know, there's a whole group of people thinking the same question that you might be a bit too nervous to ask us. This is a really safe space. So look, the major grant round for 2024 is built off our previous grant rounds, where in 2022, we redesigned our whole process. Our major grants offer $200,000 over 2 years to support community-led research by and for our mob. This is funded directly to Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, which is really changing the power dynamics that we find in research and ensuring that all of the power and the decisions lay in the hands of our communities. We look to support research that influences policy and practice through rapid translation and our community priorities. They don't have to be priorities that are just national priorities. These priorities can be really local level priorities, and the projects can be really local level projects. We recognise that our communities are diverse, and we want to ensure that the work in which we fund comes from the communities. We also look to build the capability and capacity of our Aboriginal community-controlled organisations to do research their own way. The major grants that are open right now also have an additional $20,000 KT budget, which you apply for after 12 months of the project if you're successful. We do ask in the grant application that you articulate some of the key areas of early knowledge translation planning, and we do want to ensure that communities have begun the process of gathering the correct stakeholders and thinking about the types of translational work that is going to be required to drive policy change. So we don't need to ensure that you have KT embedded in your application at this point, but know that there will be available money for you to do so after the first 12 months. There are just a couple knowledge translation questions in your application form, which you'll find through the Smarty Grants portal we'll speak to very shortly. Some of the key dates. Time is a ticking. This current grant round closes in just over 1 month. And we've aligned our grant process to coincide with board meetings. So the process that people undertake, that is undertaken when we assess our major grants, is that the applications close. We have a pool of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and other Indigenous assessors assess each grant individually, and then we come together and we have a grant panel meeting where every application is discussed at length with the whole collective of Indigenous people. We make recommendations to our board, and the Lowitja Institute board are the ones that endorse who will receive a major grant. We anticipate telling people by the end of November, start of December, and getting some grant agreements out to you then. And the projects are due to start around January. We know that it's a bit tricky to start on the 1st of January, and so we'll build in some flexible time to ensure that the project starts in an appropriate time frame for your organisation. But the grants do anticipate to go up to 2 years. You can apply for a grant that is a shorter length of time. That's perfectly okay. But we do not want to see grants that are going over those 2-year periods. We really do want to try and stick with those timeframes. So in line with our conference last year, for those who attended, it was a blast. Felicity Collis and I undertook the work to establish our research agenda moving forward. We found that some of our research agenda themes that we already had still held really strong and true, and that there was a need to keep them. But we also had some new agenda themes come up. So now we have self-determination, sovereignty, cultural determinants of health, and racism. The research agenda themes, when you're applying for a grant, you're asked to align your project with one of the research agenda themes. We recognise that these themes speak to a lot of the work that we all do, and we recognise that often projects will align with all 4 of these research agenda themes or multiple of these research agenda themes. We ask that you simply select the one that is most relevant to the project that you're undertaking. So eligibility and selection criteria. This is really, really important because I know I'm writing a grant at the moment. I know how much work goes into writing a grant, and we really wanted to ensure that we have really clear and consistent messaging about the eligibility for grants and that people aren't spending lots of time to apply for our grants if they're not eligible. The projects must be led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and that means the chief investigator must be an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person. The other role that we ask for is a project lead, and that person doesn't have to be Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. That person is generally the person who's responsible for the day-to-day running of a project. But we do prefer that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander team members are involved in this work. There is no requirements for formal research qualifications. We do not rate the research team based on metrics that's used by, say, MRFF or NHMRC, where we are looking at the track record of people within your research team. We're looking for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community leadership in this work. We only fund Aboriginal community controlled organisations. So while organisations can partner with universities or other businesses, the funding goes directly to an Aboriginal community controlled organisation, not an individual chief investigator, as are in other grant schemes. And it won't go directly to a university. The agreements that we enter into are directly with community controlled organisations. We ask that we assess the research quality and design, and we assess it against alignment with the research agenda themes that we just had up on the screen. We look for the articulation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community leadership beyond simply the money going to an Aboriginal community controlled org and having an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander CI. We look for leadership across the whole spectrum of the research that's being implemented. We also look for the building of capacity and capability for our community-led research, and also the impact and significance of the research as a community priority. And as I said before, that can be a very localized community priority. It could be a jurisdictional or a national priority. It is really quite broad, and we just ask that you really clearly articulate that within your application. I know that some people have probably begun their applications in our Smarty Grants portal, and so I will hand over to Shaylee, who will run through some of the guidance for utilising our portal for submissions. But I also welcome anyone to add any questions in our Q&A box about this if anyone is having difficulty. Thank you, Shay.
Thank you, Shell. Hello again, new mob. As mentioned, the 2024 major grant round will be delivered via Smarty Grants and will close Friday, the 2nd of August. As mentioned, we're sure that you've had a look before, but we invite you to scan the QR code on the screen so you can access, preview, and download the grant application. We encourage you to familiarise yourself with the application to ensure you are comfortable and at ease with the portal system. In addition to familiarising yourself with the Smarty Grant system, our Deadly Research and Knowledge Translation team have collated a bunch of guides to support you on your application journey. You can also access the grant guidelines, terms and conditions, examples, and templates, which can be easily downloaded off Smarty Grants. By scanning the QR code on the screen and scrolling down, you will find several links which you can click and download for easy accessibility. These PDFs will assist you throughout the application process, and we encourage you to utilise them as much as possible. Utilising the documents such as the budget examples and project proposal template will assist you to plan your grant application, and more importantly, provide a guide on how to articulate your community's deadly priorities into a meaningful research project. Next, we thought it would be handy to cover some key tips on the next slide. Now, these are just some real easy and simple tips we encourage you to consider when completing a major grant application. This ranges from using a generic organisational email for the Smarty Grants account, like your reception or admin details. So later down the track, when submitting another application for other Lowitja grant schemes, your organisation has the details and information linked to the account. Additionally, always save the progress of your application, as Smarty Grants does not save automatically, and unfortunately, neither the Lowitja Institute or Smarty Grants can rectify any unsaved progress. Finally, just re-echoing, please utilise all the documents and guides. These guides have been created by our amazing research assistant Professor Michelle Kennedy and 2 of her deadly PhD students to ensure we got proper support for our mob. Now, we know there's a lot of information for you all, so we want to support you all throughout the process. I will now go on, sorry. So we've included the best 2 support contact details for the major grant process. In the first instance, please reach out via research@lowitja.org.au for any questions regarding the major grant round, grant guidelines, as well as the grant terms and conditions. Overall, any questions regarding the content and questions including the major grant application. Additionally, I made this Deadly Smarty Grants How to Apply guide, which we encourage you to access and download via the QR code on the screen. However, if you have any questions regarding the Smarty Grants portal, including how to submit an application, navigating the portal, or changing the owner of the submission, we encourage you to contact Smarty Grants using the contact details provided. This free support service is run via Smarty Grants experts and is accessible during business hours, Monday to Friday. Furthermore, Smarty Grants experts created a how to apply small support guide for applicants, which we encourage you to access the PDF via the QR code on the screen. I will now hand back over to Shell. Thank you.
Thank you, Shay. We are just flying through this time today, so it is really up to you all to now get involved, open that Q&A box and start to drop in some questions of things that you might be wondering or things that you might be challenged with as you're working through your application. We have some frequently asked questions that is useful just to go over it while people are thinking and dropping their questions in the Q&A box. We have had many questions asking if organisations can apply for more than one application, and you absolutely can. However, because we do have a limited pool of money, only one application per organisation can be funded. So any organisations that currently hold a Lowitja Institute grant, they are not able to apply and have money in this grant round. Some organisations will be finishing up a seeding grant and they are eligible, but for organisations that already hold a major grant, you won't be eligible to hold more than one at a time. If your organisation submitted 2 or 3 applications, each individual application will be assessed on its own merit and rated and scored accordingly, but only one will be made and only one will be able to be funded. So how many grants? You can only have 1 grant per cycle. We have lots of our organisations collaborating with different universities or academics within universities, and we really encourage that. Some of our major grant funded projects right now particularly have Aboriginal early career researchers on them, which is fantastic. So you're very able to collaborate with whoever you want. The reason that we give money directly to our community controlled orgs is so that you have the power to hold in that relationship. So we really want to ensure that everyone is understands that the money does not go to the university, it goes to the org. The organisation can decide to do an agreement and fund a portion of the money to a university, but we don't enter an agreement with a university as such. Can Aboriginal land councils apply? Absolutely. Any Aboriginal community controlled organisation with a board is able to apply for our grants, and we already do work with not just health organisations, but other Aboriginal community controlled organisations in our research. The chief investigator, as I mentioned before, doesn't have to have research qualifications, but what we do need to see is that the research that is being proposed has the right research team with the skills and expertise and supports required to implement that research. So while we don't need a PhD to be a researcher, we do need to be able to see that the research is feasible, both within the time frame and within the research team and the makeup that you have. Will extensions be granted? We always work with Aboriginal communities. We know that there is many things that occur that require us to extend timeframes or hold research respectfully because it's not appropriate for the community at that point in time. So our team always work one-on-one with individual communities. We have processes put in place to put in extensions or variations. And so we would work with you in that instance if you're when you're funded. So there is extensions, but we really want to be able to see the project that's being proposed is feasible and can be achieved within the timeframes.
Thanks, Michelle and Shaylee. It's really wonderful to hear about these major grants and the ways that they've evolved since the process has been recommissioned. We've seen some really great projects in the last 12 months since we launched these grants, and I'm sure we're going to have some really exciting ones again in this round. We have had some questions start to come through, but just a reminder to anyone joining from home today or from work today to please drop in those questions to the Q&A. We will be able to get to all of them this morning. So one of the first questions we've got that I'll throw to you, Michelle, is can you give examples of workforce capacity and capabilities building?
Oh, that's a good one. Look, they've looked different in all of our grants. Sometimes that looks like ensuring that there is budget for Lowitja Institute training and resources for the community-based research team. Other times it's looked at building early career researchers who are also community members to work in partnership on the project. We want to ensure that this is going to long-term investment in community-led research. So there isn't a right or wrong way to how to build that. But what we want to know a bit about the story when we're reading your grant. We want to know a bit about the community, what kinds of research you've been involved in before, what sorts of gaps that you might have already identified that can be filled with the project, and use the time and the resources that we do have available to ensure that we embed in that capacity building. In some applications, we're also starting to see capacity building of non-Indigenous researchers. And often we'll have community orgs where we do have non-Indigenous researchers on the team to help train in a certain area or provide statistical analysis or something on a project, and we like to see that they're building their capacity as well as building the capacity of the community to drive their own research. So it can look like anything, but we want it to be real and tangible. I guess it's very different to, say, an NHMRC or an MRFF. We're not just looking for you to embed a PhD scholarship in that. But if you already have an engagement with someone who's doing their PhD and you want to add a top up or you want to add something to that, you can. It's just got to be really relevant to the community in which the research is being implemented.
Wonderful, thank you. One of the other questions that we've had come through was just asking about whether these major research grants could be for a project that might have a mental health focus, whether that's acute or chronic mental health.
Absolutely. We look at health holistically, and so our grants are really aligned with with our broad definition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health and wellbeing. So there isn't a defined scheme like you would have in other major grant rounds. This is about community-led priorities. So we have a broad remit of grants that we fund.
Wonderful. And I think that is really important to note, what you've just mentioned around having a holistic definition or perspective of what health and wellbeing is for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I know certainly since the grants have been opened and I've been fielding some of the questions that are coming directly into our inbox, that's been one of the questions that are coming through is around those specific topics and whether that fits into that definition. So it's really great that you've mentioned that holistic definition.
That's why our research agenda themes are so broad. They're not, you know, we don't have a mental health focus, but we know mental health can align with any of those research agenda themes. And that's why Lowitja does it the way that we do it, so that individual community priorities can be privileged in this process.
Wonderful, thank you. So the next question is just around the timeframes of the grant. So you did mention that the grants could be for up to 2 years and ending around the end of January 2027. So this question is just asking, could that start date be moved forward by 6 to 12 months, but still incorporate that 2-year time frame for the various needs of the research team?
The start date move forward. The start date can't really move forward because we'll have the grant. You won't know whether you got the grant until November. So the grant round will close. We'll run the assessments. You would find out by the end of November, start of December, whether you were successful in a grant. So the grant can't be moved forward because that would be now. And the project will run from next year through to 2 years. I hope I'm answering that correctly. The end date can be further forward. It can be not a full 2-year project, but we cannot start the grants until they're all assessed and awarded and contracts are signed.
Wonderful. And you briefly just mentioned it, but could that end date, so January 2027, if somebody needed an extra 6 months on top of that proposed end date that we've said, would that be something that's possible?
I would really encourage people, if you're already thinking that your project dates might differ from what we're proposing, I really encourage you to articulate that in your grant, in your application, because that really helps us assess and set up the project right from the start. I would hate for communities to then have to do a whole bunch of extra paperwork to extend something that they knew they were always going to need. So in your application, I really recommend that you articulate that, and also the justification for that. We know that communities have experienced challenges in recruiting people to positions. And so we know that there are lots of reasons that the timings of a research project might need to be changed. But please do articulate as much as you can in your application. It will really help us both in the assessment and awarding stages, but also in the planning for the contracting and deliverables without making it even more complex for you.
Wonderful. And I can just see another comments come through from the same person asking about the timeframes, and they've just said, apologies, I meant back. So that's
I know it's a bit early. I was thinking I haven't had enough coffee for that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And if we haven't answered, if that's not been clear for that person who's asked around the timeframes, please drop into the Q&A, or we can set up a time to speak one-on-one outside of this webinar as well. But sticking to the same theme of timeframes and timelines for these grants, and something that we have come up against with the projects that we're currently supporting through their 2-year period, is just around if there's delays in getting ethics approval for a project that might receive the grant funding, is there able to be a small extension on the other end to account for some delays with ethics approval?
Yes, we completely understand challenges in running a project, whether it's ethics approval or, as I said, community timelines or needing to pause for anything. We have processes in place to support you with that. The ethics approval aligns with a payment milestone, though, so it is really important that projects really understand and articulate what is required and are able to work towards it. I tried to support the ethics process a little bit, having been on an ethics committee for many, many years. The proposal template that we created for the application has been designed in a way that it supports you to do your ethics application. So we're asking questions in a set way to hopefully help some of that thinking through. I really wanted to minimise the duplication that communities had to undertake to conduct research. So we hope that we've supported a bit of that ethics process. We do have a couple questions in the application about ethics and about where you would need to get ethics and what requirements you had. So we do encourage people to start to think about and work towards that as well. But other than that, we'll work in partnership with the orgs to, keep their projects on track and help wherever we can.
Amazing, thank you. So the next question, there's a few different moving parts to it by the looks of it. So if the proposed project included a health needs assessment to focus the program development, so the specific program implementation activities requiring funding are not fully defined, how would they account for that in the budget? And how detailed does the budget have to be in this case?
Okay, so firstly, our budgets are a lot more flexible than other major grant schemes. So we do need a defined budget. We do need to see what we're doing and how that is being funded. I'm just kind of looking at the question and saying that you've got a literature review, stakeholder consultation, focus interviews, all of those actions should be able to be budgeted for to some degree, but we do also work with organisations if there's some budget flexibility. So we've had organisations before that, have had funding allocated for room hire or catering, and then they've had that sponsored by someone else. So we can work with you on the other end to ensure that there is some flexibility in how you use your budget. But as the same as any other application, we need to assess what we're funding and make sure that it is both feasible and impactful and it is aligned with our grant conditions. So there are some things that we can't fund, but as the grant assessment, the budget is one of the selection criteria. So if you don't have a defined budget, which is telling us exactly, what you're spending money on and what you're going to do, then it's probably not going to score as highly in the assessment process.
Wonderful, thank you. And I do encourage the person, I can see who's asked that question, to also reach out.
Yeah, because yours might be more nuanced than because I'm even looking like the service funding of other project-related implementation costs. Not all projects have to have in-kind support or partnered support. So if there are things that aren't easily definable at this stage, I would recommend that you have that fall into a partnership support category if you can. But there might be something a lot more nuanced in your question that we're not kind of getting, I guess.
Amazing, thank you. Another one of our questions that we've had is also regarding costing and budgeting. So would supporting a researcher from an academic institution who is co-developing the proposal, could that be costed into the overall budget, say a 0.5 FTE or similar?
Yep, that absolutely can be budgeted in, and we do see that in some of the projects that we've funded. I'm not sure if a 0.5 FTE would fit within the budget because there is a limited pool of funding, but you absolutely can. So the organisation would still be the one having the funding sent directly to the community controlled org, and they can arrange for the invoicing and payments out to the university if that's how that relationship and partnership works. We just require that when you're applying for the funding that all this information is included in your application form, because it does help us assess. I will say that funding a CI that you already have a partnership with at a university is a good approach. We have seen organisations looking to employ someone internally, and just it's a hard and long process to recruit people. So having partnerships and knowing who's going to be able to do the scope of work really will serve you well in the assessment process.
Thank you. The questions we've been getting have been wonderful and so different to the last webinar we had. So this is great. If there is no collaboration with the university, we've just got somebody asking which ethics committee or ethics body would a community controlled org apply to for ethics approval?
That's a good question. It's a bit tricky because some jurisdictions will be a little bit different to others. For example, you could still apply to AHNMRC if you're in New South Wales. We have had organisations apply directly to IATSIS given that they have a pretty straightforward application process, although they're not a health-specific human research ethics committee. We've found that to be probably the most appropriate for our community-controlled orgs to apply to. There is a fee associated with that, so we encourage you, if that is the way you're going to go, to allocate budget to that in your application form. You can get all the correct rates online, but I think by memory it's about $990 for a community-controlled organisation, but please don't hold me to it, please check. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Oh, they've just asked again, which body was that?
IATS, Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies.
And if these...
I'm going to type it in for you.
Yeah. And also, I would just point your attention to the grant guidelines, because we've got our Aboriginal community-controlled specific ethics committees listed in there too, if that's confusing for anyone linking in with us, because we know ethics in general is a really complex, challenging system to navigate. So please have a look at the guidelines as well. This question that we've got next is just asking, could you give an example of a project that meets the research theme of sovereignty, which might be a bit tricky to answer, really, because I think sovereignty can mean different things to different communities. If you've got any thoughts.
Well, I don't want to do a lack of justice by trying to summarise a project that's probably quite complex, but I will encourage you to have a look on our Lowitja Institute website, where we have the list of 2022 major grant projects and their overview. That might give you a good idea of the different types of research that we have funded and the themes that they fall under, and also just to see what kinds of work, that Lowitja Institute are supporting across the country. Oh, thank you. It's just been dropped into our funded projects link has just been dropped into the chat there. So we encourage you to have a look and really take some time to see what's being done under these major grant schemes.
Thank you. I'm just thinking of a couple of questions that I've had coming into the inbox at Lowitja, at the research inbox, that might be useful for anyone who's joining us to kind of hear about. But one of the common questions we get, and you've spoken a little bit around how our community-controlled orgs might be partnering with a researcher who's within a university, but does the organisation themselves have to be affiliated with an academic institution?
Oh, absolutely not. No. So there is... it is very different to other grant schemes. There's no scheme that's funding our communities quite like the way Lowitja is. You don't need to be affiliated. You don't have to have what is called an NHMRC administrative status, where you have a registration of any kind. You just need to be an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation. In our application form, we ask if you've ever had a Lowitja Institute grant before, and also if you've ever led research before. And we're not doing that because we want to assess that based on, only funding people who have experience in research. We're actually asking that question for our impact metrics. So, for example, the 2022 grant round, about half of the communities that were funded to do research had never led their own research before. They might have been a part of a university project before or been involved in research in some way, but never had the opportunity to lead it. And so we really think that that's part of a strong impact metrics for Lowitja Institute, that we're funding the people that don't get the funding, that we're really filling a gap to allow our communities a safe space to drive their own research. So no affiliations with universities. You won't particularly be scored higher by partnering with a university or not partnering with a university. The assessment metrics that we've set up is really about understanding your project in detail, what you're wanting to do, how you're doing it, who's going to be involved, what skills everyone has. And it's really to assess that that's a feasible way to do it and that you're going to be able to succeed in what you're setting out to do. So please don't feel like because I've mentioned a university or I work at a university as well, that is the answer, because it isn't. And again, if you have a look at some of the projects that our communities are doing, everyone is so different. Some of them do have great partnerships with, Aboriginal early career researchers that's helping build their capability and capacity. But then we also have projects that are very localized and only employing people within that organization. And it's about that organizational research capacity being built.
Thank you. It's really great to hear. One of the other questions that I'm thinking of that we get quite frequently when people are moving through their applications is around the role of the chief investigator and the project lead. And so we've set some criteria around that chief investigator being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, but the project lead doesn't need to be. I guess where sometimes it might confuse people is because those roles, we've actually curated those quite differently to what you might see in an NHMRC grant or other major grants that are out there. So are you able to just share with us a little bit around, why I guess Lowitja Institute has approached the CI and the project lead role the way that we have, and kind of what that looks like within the project? And I'm also conscious, in asking this question, we have a lot of great non-Indigenous researchers that are out there who are, I guess, nervous and cautious around them being the project lead. So I just wondered if you might be able to share about that with us.
That's a good question, because when I speak about the research team in a MRFF or an NHMRC, they will all be chief investigators or they'll all be associate investigators, and we don't have those level positions in here, predominantly because we fund the community control non-individual. So as a major grant holder of MRFF, I could leave my university and move somewhere else and take that money with me. We don't do that with Lowitja Institute funding. We fund the organisation. So the organisation is almost the chief investigator. They're not just the administrating body, they're the people we're investing in. That whole community control board is who we're investing in, not just an individual that works at the organisation at that point in time. And so with that, we know that there needs to be someone who has that chief responsibility at that organisation. So even though we're trying to dismantle and break a system of funding where we're funding an organisation, we also recognise that we still need that person who signs off and that person who is responsible. So that is the chief investigator. Sometimes that is the CEO of the organisation, because they are deemed the most appropriate person. Every community controlled organisation will know who is the most appropriate person for that position. And that is to say that they are responsible for the funding, the reporting, and the conduct of that research. The project lead is generally the person who does the day-to-day work for the project. And so that is where we do see non-Indigenous people who might be a practice manager at an organisation, or someone with relevant skills in research that works in the organisation that would like to take responsibility for the day-to-day running. So they might be a person we correspond with, but when we're sending all of our reporting requirements or, raising invoices, that's going to go to the chief investigator. They're the person that's, really ultimately responsible for the project grant. And then we have the project team, which can consist of everyone that's going to work on this project. They can be Aboriginal health workers, they can be community researchers, they might even have some roles for people within a university or another community organisation that you might be partnering with. And we like to have all of those people articulate in the application process. So you'll see a big Excel spreadsheet come out where you'll put everyone's names in and what role they're going to play. And that's for us to move beyond just who the chief investigator is and who the money's going to, for us to see who's actually going to be doing this work across the whole project. So it is a little bit confusing sometimes for those who know the colonial system and what a chief investigator is in the colonial construct. But for us, it's really about who is responsible for this money that we're giving to your organisation. And we have had chief investigators move. So we have funded a project with a chief investigator and they've moved onto a different job. The organisation themselves would then just be asked to nominate a new chief investigator that must be Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander for the project. So we have a process. If something happens and that person needs to step down from their role as a chief investigator, we do have forms and processes in place to do that.
Thank you. I think that really helps clarify for anyone that's joining us today, and hopefully that clears up around those roles for some of those questions that people might have. But of course, again, just please reach out to us at any time as you move through your application. You'll get either myself or Michelle or Shaylee on the other end of answering those questions, and we're more than happy to have a yarn at any time.
We probably do want to flag, you have a month, but don't leave it a month. Make sure that you're putting your applications in early. We don't want to have a system glitch or something at the last minute because the deadlines, we were asked last time by several people, some of which we all knew, and it was very hard to have them say, please just give me another couple of days and we can get this application in. The deadlines that we have are hard deadlines. And so it's really important for people to know that under no circumstances are we able to offer extensions on this. As I was articulating before, these grants go straight into an assessment process and then straight to align with a board meeting. So being community control, mob that are online that are community control, they understand that we have all of these structures and systems in place, and this grant cycle really sits within our community controlled structures and systems. So we can't give any extensions no matter how good the story is and no matter how much we want to, because we just have too many players, too many moving parts for this grant round. So please do start your applications early. There is a process, and if you email any of us, you can export a PDF version of the application where you can see all of the sections. We do have the research proposal, but there is a series of questions that we ask you to complete that are in addition to your application, to your proposal. And so it is really important that people are aware of what's going to be required in the application process, and that you begin these as early as possible. We can see in our system when you've started an application, and we could sort of reach out to you and say, hey, it's 2 days left. Are you ready to submit it? But we actually can't edit it or see the details. So we can see your organisation and say the person who's being responsible for uploading or putting in the application. But that's all we can see on our end. So please do start early, reach out to us early. Don't be shame, be game. Sometimes this is the first time our orgs have ever done an application like this. And so we recognise that, and we're here to help.
Thank you. And we do aim to get back to everyone as quick as possible. So if you reach out to us, the research@lowitja.org.au email, we're monitoring and we're waiting to answer questions. So we'll jump onto that at any point, and we'll make sure that you're in touch with either myself or Michelle or Shaylee to answer any questions. So I think that's all we've got coming through today, unless anyone has any last minute questions they want to pop in. But we're really excited to see all the applications that come through. I'm really excited by some of the projects I've already heard about with our organisations considering putting in an application. So please reach out. We're here. We love yarn. And we're here to help. But thank you for joining us all this morning. We've got a recording of the first webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago. This one has also been recorded, so it will be available on the Lowitja Institute YouTube channel, and we'll pop some links up on our socials as well once the video has been edited. So you can come back and watch this at any time or reach out. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Shaylee, as well. It's been wonderful having you both this morning to talk about the major research grants.
Thanks. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.